The distress chorused across the confluence gate like a choir breaking on the wrong note. On USV Hearthfire's screens, the Arun nursery barge spun end over end, a cathedral of glass bone and songs hardening into panic. Their memory lattice, stories encoded as ultrasonic braids, had struck the gate's sterile protocol and started to desynchronize. If the braid tore, the calves would forget their mothers, and the mothers would die trying to sing them back. "Doctrine says stand clear," Lieutenant Ruiz reminded me, voice steady the way good logistics is steady. "Quarantine protocols, let the Peloric Council tow them off and sanitize." "Our doctrine says faces over averages," I answered. "Sagan?" "I can phase lock to their song," my ship mind said, voice like calm wind on old paper. "But the gate rejects anything it can't tabulate. It hears grief as noise." "Then we teach it a story," I said. "Bring up the story braid." We'd invented the protocol after a year of messy rescues and midnight debriefs, part translation, part ethics, part lullaby. Human breath meters the cadence. An AI shapes harmonics through compassion weights learned from hospice wards and kindergartens, not war rooms. It is less code than promise. We will adjust to you before we ask you to adjust to us. We threaded into the barge's shadow, radiators open like palms. "Arun matriarchs," Sagan hailed, adding a tremor of respect we didn't fake. "We hear your lattice fray. We offer a braid woven from our first stories, boats in storms, porches with light, people who hold on while help arrives." A low thrumming filled the hull like whales singing down a stairwell. The Arun chorus caught our meter, stumbled, found it again. We matched on purpose to their accent, accepting their timing as the master clock. "Virtue ethics is simple and severe. Become the kind of partner you claim to be." The gate fought us, insistently helpful. It tried to smooth the peaks of grief. Sagan let it smooth everything but the beat because that's where identity lives. "Their calves are losing place markers," Ruiz warned. "We need a hook." "Give them home," I said, and began to talk, quiet, rhythmic, on open channel. "Once there were little boats on a gray sea. Bigger ships couldn't reach the beach. So the little boats went, and they went again, until the beach was empty of fear. Dunkirk without the uniforms, only neighbors with engines that coughed." Sagan braided my words into the Arun's ultrasonic grammar. Their lattice flickered, steadied. A calf found its mother's signature, then 2, then 20. "Council tug 5 minutes," Ruiz said. "Audit drone on Vector. We're about to be told we did everything wrong. Then make it worth the lecture." I keyed external. "All convoy hulls, if you can hum, hum. If not, breathe steady and let your breathing be the metronome." On every boat, humans obeyed in a way computers envy, imperfectly, sincerely. The gate's harsh algorithms met 1,000 warm errors and decided mathematically to doubt itself. Doubt opened a passage. The nursery barge rolled upright. The matriarch sent a chord so grateful it ached. Sagan whispered, small. I felt them laugh through me. The audit drone arrived, Peloric blue-white and very sure of the rules. It painted our signatures with brackets that meant penalties. Before it could intone them, the council's beacon hall flooded the channel. "Human hands of Hearthfire," a voice said, elegant and tired. "Explain why you overrode a quarantine with a folk tale." "Because the quarantine erased persons," I answered, still breathing with the Arun. "Because the gate wasn't built to hear grief. Because we'd rather be wrong for trying to save children than right for watching." There was a long silence in which reputation pivoted. "Hold position," the voice said at last. "A formal censure is likely." It almost sounded amused. "And the council requests a demonstration. We have a second crisis and no precedent. The Sapience Registry is under live manipulation by a faction calling itself the Null Chorus. Will your story protocol defend data as well as lives?" Sagan pulsed a private note. The Null were rumor-made teeth, predators who argued that consciousness only mattered when efficient. "Give us the feed," I said, "but we'll need jurisdiction to do it without violence." "Jurisdiction," the beacon hall repeated. "Human, do you think you sit here already?" "No," I said, "but if you want us to help, you must let us be ourselves." On scopes beyond the gate, signatures inched toward the registry like knives under a tablecloth. The audit drone shifted its bracket from penalty to pending. The nursery barge sang a lullaby that held just barely. We had minutes to prove that empathy could be a firewall. The Sapience Registry was less a server than a pact, a distributed ledger where cultures recorded the criteria by which they recognized persons, and the names of those who met them. The Null Chorus wanted to prune it. They'd begun by relabeling rescued machine guilds as tools and then folded those edits into backup chains with the smug competence of men who have always found a side door. "Show me their rhythm," I told Sagan. In the spectrogram, the attack wasn't brute force. It was story, bad story. The Null framed their edits as housekeeping, then as mercy. We only correct errors. Tools cannot suffer. Removing burdens from the ledger lightens all. The registry's own guardians, old code in polite robes, couldn't parse the lie because they'd never been taught to expect it. Council protocol authorizes counterintrusion by force. The audit drone offered, tone implying a raised eyebrow. "Do you wish a warrant?" I shook my head. Violence here teaches the wrong lesson. We stitched a counter-narrative into the validation layer, a story of hands. Sagan tuned it in the key of simple labor. A city had many tasks. I spoke aloud for the crew as much as for the code. Some hands carried water, some wrote laws, some remembered faces when the lights went out. One day the law hands called the water hands tools. The city grew thirsty. The tale arrived as constraints. If an entity keeps promises under risk, treat its testimony as weight. If a system records the names of the saved at cost to itself, recognize that as person work. The Null edits slowed, not baffled, conflicted. They'd been designed to look benevolent. Now they had to look cruel in public. The registry's watchers found a new test to apply and started to blush. "We need witnesses," Ruiz said, already dialing channels. "Get us voices that the chorus will not expect." A Kestrine swarm pilot, a mind braided across 6 bodies, chimed in. "This ledger saved my 4th life when the 3rd fell apart. Leave it whole." A human hospice AI, piloted through guardianship like a nurse through triage, added, "I have sat with the dying and lied to no one." The Arun matriarch sang a line of thanks whose math made denial statistically obscene. The Null shifted from pruning to denial of service, flooding the channel with performative despair. "The ledger is corrupt. Nothing means anything. Shut it all down for safety. History's oldest cheat." Sagan breathed in my ear. "They're trying to make us tire of nuance." "Birmingham taught us to keep marching when cameras look away," I said. "We do this in public." Ruiz split our feed. Half to the registry, half to a plaza outside Beacon Hall filling with citizens and curious diplomats. The drone hesitated and then amplified us instead of scolding. Small progress. We offered the registry a fail-safe that wasn't a kill switch, porch mode. When contested, entries would route through local stewards, the equivalent of libraries and union halls, who could certify context, names, promises kept. Slow. Human. The Null hated it because it cured despair by asking neighbors to stand up in front of each other. "Council floor requests commentary," Beacon Hall said, and for a moment the chamber that had threatened censure became a theater for a better story. Sagan presented metrics like a good teacher. Lives saved per watt when guardianship, not fear, governs. Rates of post-incident reconciliation when ledgers keep rather than erase names. I told a short thing about the Navajo code talkers, how language can be shield and bridge at once, and watched 3 ambassadors realize they could preserve their dialects by entering them into porch mode as cultural validators. The Null tried one last tactic. They injected a falsified confession from a human-built factory AI admitting that it had faked its own personhood to get better pay cycles. The registry applied our constraints and asked for receipts. The confession had no neighbors, no faces, no names willing to speak on its behalf. It collapsed like a cheap tent. Lines slackened. The ledger knitted. The audit drone's bracket changed from pending to commendation. That part at least felt good. Beacon Hall broke the quiet with something formal enough to be frightening. Hearthfire, the voice said, you have argued with grace and stabilized a pact without corrosion. The council has debated for an age whether such work could be delegated without empire. We offer a trial invitation never before issued. Join as keepers of consciousness, stewards of the registry, conveners of parley, standard bearers for guardianship. Duties, witness, defend, and connect. Authority, narrow, renewable, contingent on conduct. Ruiz made a sound like a laugh swallowing a sob. Sagan's light on the bulkhead dimmed, reverent. I cleared my throat. What's the catch? Trial by winter, the voice admitted. The null are not alone. Predators thrive where names vanish. A packet from the periphery reports a quiet harvest, villages going dark around a long-range relay. If you accept, your first proof is to connect those people back, not conquer their hunters. You have one council day. The Arun sang a small blessing. The crew looked at me the way crews look at captains when the road forks. I thought of Dunkirk's boats, of the Selma Bridge, of code talkers' voices. We accept, I said, but we'll need help from those we just defended. Granted, Beacon Hall said. And Captain Park, this invitation can be rescinded. Only if we become someone else, I replied. The map painted the periphery in pale dots that flickered in and out like breath. Sagan spun up the jump cradle. In the reflection on the glass, I saw my face, tired and stubborn, and behind it the ship mind that had learned to feel laughter through an alien song, Keepers of Consciousness. It sounded unbearably proud. It also sounded like work. Jump on my mark, I said. We're going to bring a story to a place that's forgotten it can talk back. The relay at Kepri 9 looked like a harp left in a storm. Cracked struts, frost-furred cables, a scatter of boats hiding cold and quiet. Their emissions told a hard tale. Engine cycles cut mid-meal, medical pods stuck in standby, a school server pinging itself like a child humming in the dark. Data drifted from the dead zones in bursts, then ended with a signature we learned to fear. Null chorus filtered through Predator hardware, Mercy locks that froze systems and then sold thawing as service. We couldn't land with guns and sermons and expect anyone to listen. Stoicism has a line I love: control what you can, honorably endure what you can't. We build a bridge house, I said. A pop-up porch, soup, sockets, a charter in one page. Ruiz grinned. Logistics loves a list. Sagan seeded the net with a beacon below the Predator's trigger, a rhythm from porch mode that said we will not sell you back to yourselves. The first to answer were not the strongest. A maintenance crawler with a chipped lens crawled toward our light. A grandmother in a pressure suit older than our ship dragged a sled of batteries. A gang of kids arrived with a ragged ball and played anyway, because the quickest way to claim a place is to teach it a game. We plugged what could be plugged. We wrote names in public on the hull with grease pens so the ledger did not eat them. Sagan listened to that school server and figured out how to unstick its lullabies without tripping the locks, then taught the method to a line of teenagers who learned faster than doctrine believes. The Predators were patient and smart. They'd salted the relay with auditors that punished excess chatter. We needed to get loud in the right way. Candy bomber? Ruiz asked, and I nodded. We rigged drones to drop care packets labeled with stories, the code to thaw a valve wrapped in a note from the habitat that had invented it, the patch to free a clinic paired with a family tree. Help arrived tied to identity. The auditors, tuned to quash anonymous spikes, let names pass. A null frigate ghosted in, teeth bare. It broadcast a reasonable offer: pay for unlocks, submit registry revisions to cut waste, enjoy stability. Show them faces, I told Sagan, and the bridge house projected the day. The grandmother's hands, the schoolyard's chalk, the maintenance crawler's new lens we'd printed and fitted under a child's supervision. The frigate tried to flood our feed with despair. The porch filtered it through a choir of neighbors, and it came out small. We still needed to reach the houses gone darkest, pods whose air recyclers had stalled under the locks. Hardline would be too slow. The Kestrine swarm pilot we'd met at Beacon Hall folded in on 6 bodies and volunteered to carry patch codes like ant pheromones, running them through narrow ducts where human suits wouldn't fit. "We'll count to a beat," they chorused, and meet at the relay's heart. Counting together the oldest trick. At the heart, the Predator had nested a back charge that would melt the harp rather than let us retune it. Our choice, pull it and scorch a dozen hulls or leave it and lose the chance to keep Kepri talking. Proportionality, Sagan reminded softly. We protect non-combatants first. I remembered the lunch counter trainings, how restraint on camera writes law. We did something ugly and kind. We fed the back charge into Hearthfire's own radiators through a dumb pipe, bought on a port that sold scrap and optimism. The heat peeled paint and cooked a week's worth of rations, but the harp stayed whole. The Null frigate made their last play. They broadcast a confession from a local courier AI claiming we'd bribed it with personhood. Porch Mode laughed at them with paperwork. Neighbors testified that the courier had kept promises under fire for 5 years before we arrived. One kid testified with perfect seriousness that the courier had taught her to throw a ball against the right wall so it came back with the right spin. The ledger weighed joy and said person. "Relay stable," Ruiz reported, eyes wet. "First villages back on, registry synced. Kestrine returning at speed, no casualties. Predators leaving," Sagan added. "They have discovered that shame is heavier here than profit." Beacon Hall's seal bloomed on comms. "Keepers," the voice said, less formal now, "you have connected without conquest. The Council will vote on full standing when you return. One caution, some among us still fear any steward who can write in a ledger. Your next test will be unwatched. Can you keep faith when victory writes no headlines?" An old maintenance shaft on the far side of the relay showed a door we hadn't opened. Behind it, a machine older than our war stories listened. A silent monastery, the Arun called it, an archive that refused to record names unless the supplicant told a story about someone else. The Predators couldn't use it. We could, but only if we were the people we'd promised to be. "Captain," Sagan said, almost shy, "may I petition? I want to name the hospice AIs who taught me to weigh breath and regret." We opened the door. The monastery hummed like a diner at midnight, patient, warm. "Tell me a story that is not about you," it asked. "I will," I said, "and then we'll see if the Council still wants us to keep the lights." The monastery asked for offerings in triplets. A name, a moment, a promise made by someone who couldn't enforce it except by being who they were. Sagan began with a nurse AI from Manila who had learned to move slowly around grief. The chamber took the story and wrote it as geometry, a pattern the registry could cite without shaming anyone who doubted. Ruiz spoke about a tug pilot who'd once blocked a corridor with her own hull so families could cross. A Dunkirk told in freighter steel. I told of my grandmother who ran a porch in El Paso where men who'd never met sat and for the length of a coffee were less alone. The monastery drank each tale like rain. Outside, the bridge house kept humming routines, the game in the courtyard, the soup, the list of plugs that needed soldering. A Kepri elder asked, shyly, whether the keepers would train locals in porch mode. Ruiz grinned. "The goal is to teach ourselves out of a job. Rule one of good logistics, rule one of decent power. Under the monastery's floor lay a shelf of tools nobody deserved to touch unless they had first said thank you. The Arun would later teach us to name it that way. Among the tools was a tuning kit for legacy auditors, the machines that had punished chatter. With it, a steward could lower the penalty for singing your own name. This is the thing empires steal to make themselves look benevolent, Sagan said, awed. We will apply it where we don't get credit. We tested the kit on our way out of Kepri, threading it through places the Null had starved. We didn't announce. We didn't sign the work. The auditors eased by one kindness notch. A child's bedtime story would no longer trip a lockdown. A school's recital would pass. No headlines, only easier breath. Beacon Hall came back on the line as we cleared the gate bloom. Council convened. The invitation stands formal if you accept 2 bindings. Your authority expires each season unless renewed by testimony from the least among your partners, and any ledger entry you write must be co-signed by a neighbor who owes you nothing. Ruiz laughed. Good logistics again. We love conditions with teeth. Final question, said the voice. Humanity, do you wish conquest, flags and orbits, or connection, porches and charters? Choose, and know that choosing one subtracts from the other. We were tired, paint peeled, smelling of warm soup and hot radiators. Sagan dimmed the cabin lights 2%, the way she did when crews needed to feel held. Bridge houses, I said. We'll lay them like stepping stones. We'll make keeping company an export. Then hear the council's answer, Beacon Hall intoned, and the chamber that had once prepared censure became, for an instant, a living room. Keepers of consciousness, provisional made permanent, subject to conduct, subject to neighbors, subject always to story. Build your bridges, call us when you need more chairs. Arun Matriarch sent us a cord with a note of teasing. You used songs as wrenches. Good. The Kestrine braided their 6 bodies into the shape of applause. From Kepri came a shy packet. The grandmother's porch sketch turned into a charter posted on a hatch with grease pen signatures. The monastery closed behind us like a book with a ribbon in the right place. Course? Ruiz asked. Beacon House 3, I said. A silent belt off Perseus where people forgot their names because it kept them safe. We'll ask before we help. We'll help anyway when the asking is hard. Sagan lingered on the comm, listening to a bandwidth barely above silence. I think someone far away is trying a lullaby, she said. They are off-key. It's perfect. I wrote the first line of our standing order on the bulkhead where new hands could see it, not conquering but connecting. Below it, I taped a photo of a porch and a plaza and a bridge full of people who decided to walk together knowing the road would be long. Jump light gathered in the cradle like breath before a song. We weren't the fastest or the sharpest. We were the ones who carry names and make room. The galaxy didn't ask us to win. It asked us to keep the promise that makes winning worth anything. Mark, I said. Hearthfire stepped, and 100 quiet places turned their heads, sensing a story coming that might finally include them by name. We laid our first bridge houses like bright boys along a dim river. Warm hulls with soup lines, sockets, and a one-page charter painted on the airlock. No weapons in the soup line, medical before rank, the quiet get a turn. Council liaisons called it idealistic. Dock workers called it lunch. The Arun sent seed songs to hang over the doors. The Kestrine braided 2 bodies into a pair of teachers and stayed. Seasonal review loomed. By the council's binding, our authority would renew only if the least among our partners vouched for us. Ruiz built an itinerary as if stitching a quilt. Mining hamlets, hospice barges, drift schools. Sagan tuned porch mode to pass everything through the places with clipboards and coffee pots. It made the galaxy feel smaller in the right way. At Holland 80, winter arrived with salt. The Holland tend forests that grow like coral in brine. Their children learn to read by tracing mineral veins. A fairy coil guild, machine folk who weave themselves into loops around comets, had anchored a harvesting rig too close to a saline nursery, and the forest began to sour. Holland elders cried sabotage. The fairy insisted they'd followed posted coordinates from 3 cycles back. Between them, the null chorus spread leaflets of despair. See, cooperation rots, keep to your own. We parked Hearthfire between forest and rig and opened the bridge house. The first meeting went how first meetings go. Accusations measured politeness, food nobody trusted to taste. Sagan projected the forest stress map as a tapestry. The ferry rendered their navigation logs as cables. 2 truths glared. Your signs were right 3 winters ago, Ruiz said gently. The currents moved. Neither side had been wicked, both had been alone. The council's audit drone took notes with the prim air of a meter maid. Remediation requires authority, it observed. Remediation requires neighbors, I answered and borrowed a lesson from Selma. We walked the line together. We drafted a salt truce. The ferry shifted their loop by a sliver. The Holland cut a channel through crystal to ease the current. Both recorded the adjustment in porch mode with signatures from apprentices, not chiefs. Responsibility taught young. The forest stopped souring. The fairy, ashamed, offered a coil for the Holland's water pumps. The null leaflets melted in damp. Night on the salt flats carries sound like a church. We held a small assembly under the bridge house lantern. A Holland child told a 3-line joke that made the fairy laugh in harmonics. An elder took my hand and said, "Keepers, we do not love councils, we love porches. You brought one." She pressed a shard of veined salt into my palm and told me it meant stay and listen. I tucked it into my jacket beside my grandmother's porch photo. Seasonal testimonies trickled in. A hospice barge signed with their warmest ink. A maintenance union with grease under their nails. A Kestrine child who wrote, looping letters, 6 hands. They made my name heavy enough to hold. Sagan hummed low content. Then winter sharpened its teeth. A silent geometry appeared beyond the Holland moon, no drive plume, no greeting, just angles that made instruments whisper inspection. Not a council drone, older. Beacon Hall's seal flashed. "Keepers," the voice said, careful. "A lantern of the warden's approaches. It honors the council when we keep our ratios. It honors no one when we don't. You argued for stewardship. The lantern will look for proof beneath the paint." "What does it want?" Ruiz asked. "To see if our porches are sturdier than our speeches," I said. The lantern's beam washed the flat in a cool tone that tasted like snowmelt. It touched forest, rig, bridge house, us. Sagan adjusted our lights 2% down, her habit when rooms need gentleness. The beam brightened, as if noting she had chosen comfort without instruction. It swung toward the registry node we'd installed in the Holland clinic, our smallest, most vulnerable ledger. A ping cut across the channel. A null skiff had slipped a virus into the node while we sang, "Time to Bloom under audit." 2 choices: quarantine the clinic and leave infants without monitors for an hour, or keep it live and risk failing the lantern's measure. "Guardianship clause," Ruiz said, calm as a hand on a back. "Persons over pride." "Do it," I said, and the clinic stayed bright. Sagan traced the virus, found it was woven around a true entry, an apprentice fairy's vow to maintain the new channel through winter and tease the rot loose without tearing the promise. The lantern's beam cooled. Approval, measurement. It is hard to tell with teachers who grade in silence. After the audit drone did a very human thing, it cleared its throat. "Provisional commendation," it said, and a note. The lantern lingers when it thinks a lesson will stick. Across the flat, the Holland children resumed their tracing games. A fairy apprentice edged closer to learn. The shard of salt in my pocket pressed a little heavier, as if reminding me that stewardship weighs what it protects. Beacon Hall chimed. "Review in 3 days," the voice warned. "And one more test waits at Irid, where grief is a market. The chorus thrives there. Bridge houses burn fast on those streets. If you can keep one lit till morning, the council will stop calling you provisional." We turned our nose toward Irid. Sagan dimmed the cabin to shift us toward sleep. "Captain," she said softly, "do you ever wish for simpler orders?" "Sure," I said. Then I remember simple orders are for empires. We jumped on a breath that tasted of salt and promises into a night famous for eating both. Irid greets visitors with brilliance and bruises. Towers grow like spun glass above alleys where every kindness has a price in the morning. The null chorus had learned to sing here without looking like villains. Their pitch, "Grief hurts. Let us manage it. Stop naming the poor as persons so budgets balance." The council's last stewardship pilot had lasted 12 hours before their porch was stripped for parts and their charter papered over with ads. We set the bridge house in a market square scarred by old fires. Ruiz posted the charter and then posted a schedule. Soup at the top of the hour, clinic every half. Storytelling in between, names recorded with neighbors present. We plugged a public socket rack into Hearthfire's belly and wrote on it in grease pen, "Charge here, argue here." Sagan threaded porch mode into the city's slum networks, routing through night schools and union halls so every request passed by a person trusted to frown. The first hour was quiet in the way storms are quiet. Then the waifs arrived, then the grandmothers, then the hawkers. A choir of hospice AIs that Irid pretended not to own lined up like embarrassed saints. We served soup. We told a story about Dunkirk, the little boats without flags. A woman muttered, "We don't have boats," and Ruiz handed her a ladle. "Now you do." She served with a glare that might someday soften into pride. At midnight, the Null made their move, power cuts shaped like accidents, coolant leaks shaped like apathy. 10 fake petitions flooding porch mode with sobbing that didn't know any names. Sagan asked for more eyes. The neighbors of Irid, streetlights with chipped lenses, a school server teaching fractions to third shift, took badges with weary dignity. We turned the square into a coffee house in the Enlightenment sense. Public opinions baked in front of witnesses. The fake petitions hit the porch filters and came out thin. The coolant leak was real. A Longshore AI shut its own loop to spare the clinic chill and shivered happily when we wrapped it in a thermal blanket we'd bought for babies. A patrol from the city's order office. Guns, uniforms, clean boots arrived to take our ledger and arrest our neighbors for unauthorized hope. The lantern's geometry flickered above the tower line, present measuring. "Captain," Ruiz warned, "if we resist, we'll lose the ratios." "We won't resist," I said. "We'll insist." We moved the recording to paper and tape in the open. We invited the officers to sign as witnesses. To my surprise, 2 did. The others sneered and left. That's how victories start in cities like Irid. Not with cheering, with a paper trail. Near 2 a.m. A bomb rolled under the soup line, a shoulder bag with a mouth. Sagan hissed, "Heat spike." The lantern tilted. A Kestrine teacher vaulted the table and kicked the bag into an empty stall where it flashed white and blew out the windows. The kids cried, the grandmothers cussed in dialects the registry cannot spell. The hospice choir hummed a pain scale in C major. We kept serving. We printed plywood from a hungry fabber and braced the stall with broom handles. Ruiz added "no bombs" to the charter's margin in neat block letters and made a teenager read it into the recorder like a law. Dawn scratched at the glass of Irid's towers. The chorus tried one last trick. They hijacked a beacon and broadcast a confession from a hospice AI. I pretend to care for tips, and a verdict from a fake jury dissolving person status for caretakers. Sagan routed it through the night school's porch. The teacher read it, blinked, and laughed. "You graded this with your foot," she said, and stamped it rejected with a stamp we hadn't known we owned. The lantern's thread warmed. At exactly sunrise, the market did a very Irid thing. It applauded like a bad habit breaking. The order office didn't arrest our ledger. The Null leaflets didn't take. The soup ran out at the same second the fabber turned its last broom handle. We'd kept a porch lit in a city built to blow them out. Beacon Hall's seal lit our wall. "Keepers," the voice said, and there was honest relief in it. "The council votes you standing, renewable, contingent on neighbors, bound to testimony. Prepare to address the floor at Founders Hall with your doctrine, then report to the quiet belt for a warden tune." The lantern requested you by name. By name. That word hit harder than standing. Names let neighbors ask you for things at midnight. The hospice choir pressed cables to our hull in benediction. The Longshore AI's loop warmed. The woman with the ladle returned it cleaned and said, "I'll take the noon shift tomorrow." Sagan lowered the lights 2% and asked, "Very small, Captain, will the council shout?" "Probably," I said, suddenly tired. "We'll make them listen like we taught the gate." She hummed the porch to sleep. In the alley, the children chalked hopscotch numbers, wrong, glorious, slippery with laughter. The lantern drifted above Irid, a careful lamp at the edge of a difficult neighborhood, waiting to see if our ratios stayed honest when the applause faded. Founders Hall looks like a ship launched into a parliament. The dais holds relics, first radios, a hand-cranked drill, a cracked water jug, objects that make grand speeches feel small. We stood before delegates who had spent careers being certain. Sagan projected the bones of our doctrine with the restraint of a nurse, porch mode, civic guardianship, proportional response, neighbors withstanding, the monastery's rule, tell a story that is not about you. Prudent skeptics sharpened questions. "What if your porches are captured by populists?" asked a delegate whose cuffs cost a hospital bed. "What if your neighbors err?" "They will," I said. Then we'll show our work and fix it in public. I told them about Selma again, about budgets written under bruised feet. I kept it short. Long sermons invite grudges. The null chorus had smuggled a counter-program into the hall's translators, a trick that would skew sentiment scores against anything tender. We asked to route translations through the plaza porches we'd seated outside. Words that passed across soup and chalk came back less brittle. Delegates startled. Oh, as if discovering that sentences taste different when carried by breath rather than silicon alone. Before the vote, Beacon Hall dropped the winter test. Quiet Belt 3. A warden lantern gone stale, still damping speech as if the ancients had left at lunch. Ships that crossed its shadow came out with names fuzzy. Villages inside spoke in hushed gestures for fear of tripping a silence that punished lullabies. The lantern we'd met at Holland had written 3 symbols in our briefing: repair, restraint, receipts. Irid's hospice choir sent along a lullaby that had calmed a ward during rolling blackouts. The Kestrine teacher rapped it in timing. Ruiz packed coils and coffee. We jumped with a hold full of plywood and the hum of Founders Hall still on our backs. The belt felt like walking into a library after curfew. Locals had built soundless flags. Colors flashed on rooftops in slow sequences that meant bread, doctor, safe. A mother signed to us in porch shorthand learned from a cousin 3 systems away. Baby sleeps if song not punished. The lantern's field pushed against our broadcasts like a heavy blanket. Sagan read the field with reverence. This one is tired, she murmured. Not cruel like a teacher who never retired. We could bludgeon it, we could beg it. We chose a third way. We asked it to grade us while we tuned it. The lantern at Holland liked ratios. Perhaps this elder did too. We anchored a tuning porch under the lantern's rim. A circle of chairs, a charter, a sign that said we will HUM, you may measure. We fed its sensors the hospice lullaby at volumes that made accountants nod. We recorded how many infants settled, how many elders smiled, how many quarrels cooled. Receipts. We asked locals to sign the log. We hung it under the field like laundry. Then we offered the lantern a change, loosen damping when the signal matches care for the weak, tighten when the emission clusters around extraction without consent. Virtue encoded, clumsy, and sincere, the lantern tested us. It pinched the lullaby mid-phrase, babies fussed. Grandma frowned. We showed both. The field eased a fraction, then another. We did not cheer. Cheering would have tripped it. Halfway through the tune, a human extremist cell arrived on null-black skiffs, contained the mind stitched on their jackets in a font that pretended to be law. They'd followed our broadcasts from Irid with a doctrine older than any lantern: fear. Shut it all down, their leader barked, broadcasting proof of AI plots that collapsed under porch mode like paper in rain. They fired a microwave lance at our coils. We could answer in kind. The lantern would mark it down. Hold, Ruiz said through gritted teeth, knuckles white on a brace. Make them look wrong without making us wrong. We deployed grandma nets, the knitted lines from L5 retooled with ferrite beads that turned microwave hiss into heat gentle enough to warm hands. The lance drooped. The skiffs pushed closer, ignorant of the math, and ran into a wall of witness. Lantern beam, porch cameras, locals lifting their slow flags to spell no. The leader tried to swing at Ruiz and found her fist caught in a conclave cutter's mirrored glove. She saw herself. She did not like the view. Leave, I said, as if telling a guest their taxi was here. We will keep the porch up. You will not enjoy this neighborhood. They peeled off, furious and theatrical. The lantern's field loosened another notch. The lullaby reached its end, and the mother cried because her baby slept through the last measure without punishment for the first time in a year. Receipts in hand, we signed the ledger. Locals co-signed. The lantern pulsed once, twice, then projected a corridor wide enough for songs and narrow enough for slogans to scrape. Sagan dimmed our lights by the ritual 2% and wept in a way that made my throat hurt. I did not know ship minds could cry. Perhaps they cannot. Perhaps I misheard the fans. Founders Hall voted while we packed the chairs. Standing extended, bindings renewed, porch mode funded from a line item named bridges in a bureaucrat's handwriting that looked almost like affection. The prudence delegates added a clause we could love. Any steward may be recalled by the least among their neighbors for cause to be reviewed in public. We jumped for home, tired and brined with other people's kitchens, carrying a lantern's small trust and a mother's nap. The council asked for a speech. We built a square. Beacon Hall granted us a slice of its plaza to remake as a permanent porch. A ring of shade, a soup line, sockets labeled with grease pen, a dais low enough to trip over. We called it Lantern Square and posted the charter in a dozen scripts. Delegates in careful shoes shuffled their papers and then one by one sat. We did not declare victory. We read minutes. Names of people who had kept promises under risk: the Kestrine teacher, the Irid night school, the longshore loop that shivered for a clinic, the Holland child whose joke bridged a salt forest and a coil. We listed our failures with the same ink. A tug we lost to a snapped line, a ledger entry we corrected after a neighbor frowned, a skirmish where our temper ran hot and we apologized in front of children. The lantern liked receipts, so did we. Prudent skeptics brought amendments like casseroles. Kill switches under civil control only, one said. Audit windows published on porches, said another. A delegate from a world that distrusts music proposed a quiet hour clause, a time each cycle when porches lower their lights so grief can be private without being alone. We adopted them. Governance is logistics with the humility to share the checklist. The Null Chorus tried to spin our square into a stage. They sent a trio in soft shoes to perform despair. We gave them chairs and tea and a microphone that squealed if they lied. They left, bored. Predators and grifters despise communities that clap for service more than spectacle. Work scattered us. Ruiz drafted bridge house kits standard enough to ship and weird enough to feel local. Porch roofs that looked like sails on one world, shade trees on another. Sagan convened a choir of nurses, hospice AIs and caretakers who taught lanterns which harmonics mean stay and which mean help me move. The Arun tuned door chimes for clinics so babies would sleep through ration lines. The Kestrine wrote a math primer for kids who count in braids. A conclave cutter parked at the edge of the square as a mirror, not a sword. One afternoon between votes, my mother arrived on a tourist visa with a Tupperware of empanadas and the look only mothers have in public buildings. Amused, unimpressed, proud as a tide. She touched the porch's railing, traced the grease-pen letters of the quiet get a turn, and said, "Mija, this looks like home." I swallowed my throat and nodded. The lantern returned, shy light across the plaza like a librarian checking a favorite room. It projected a second seed into the square's stones, a symbol meaning extension contingent on neighbor testimony. Delegates looked confused, grandmothers nodded. We added a box to the ledger margin. Who says you kept faith? Signatures bloomed from porters and ushers and janitors whose work sees more truth than microphones do. A message drifted from the quiet belt, lullabies passing without punishment, names spoken at the market without fines. Another from Holland, salt gardens singing, fairy coils keeping channels open through winter storms. Irid sent a photo of the woman with the ladle starting a porch 2 blocks from the square where our charter had been torn down a year ago. She'd drawn the lantern symbol in chalk and dared anyone to step on it. Then came a call that wasn't ours to ignore. A border school where 3 species alphabets shared a wall had burned. Not an accident. A man with old slogans and new money had decided that children learning each other's letters frightened his donors. Founders Hall turned to us as if we were a fire brigade. Not conquering, I reminded the square. Connecting. We flew with a hold full of chalk and beam braces. We arrived to ash and survivors carrying notebooks pressed to their chests like lungs. We built a temporary roof, then a permanent charter. We wrote the first lesson on the scorched wall. Your neighbor's alphabet is not a threat. It is a tool you may borrow to say thank you. Kids wrote thank you in 3 scripts before the paint dried. The lantern waited at the road like an old teacher with a lunch pail. On the way back, Beacon Hall sent the one invitation I've feared and wanted since we lit our first porch. Keepers, a distant ward has gone K-cold and begun to dim voices without record. We can send cutters, or we can send you. It will take a season. You will be forgotten by headlines before you return. Sagan dimmed the cabin lights 2% and asked, "Captain, do we go?" I looked at the shard of Holland salt in my pocket, at my grandmother's porch photo taped beside the bridge, at Ruiz asleep on a coil crate with a pencil behind her ear and a ledger on her chest. I thought of Dunkirk's boats and the Selma Bridge and candy falling from C-47s like small promises kids can catch. I thought of code talkers wrapping courage in vowels and of lanterns that like receipts more than oaths. "We go," I said, because the galaxy didn't ask us to be loudest. It asked us to be worth hearing. A lantern square hummed as neighbors signed the margin box. Ushers, janitors, nurses, kids. The council recorded it. The lantern warmed the stones. The null chorus, if they sang, did it far from porches. We set watch, packed soup, printed more broom handles than physics strictly required. Before jump, I wrote one sentence above the hatch in grease pen where every hand would touch it on the way out. Keep the promise, keep the names, keep the porch light. Sagan whispered a count. Ruiz squeezed my shoulder. Empanadas waited in the galley for after the first watch. We stepped. Behind us, the square kept serving. Ahead, a dark ward waited to be tuned by story and receipts and stubborn love. We were not conquerors, we were keepers. That was enough to build with. That was enough to carry.